Hello, my friends. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to You Normal. This is the place where we push into and rediscover what our own normal is versus what the world around us defines it to be. Today, I am honored and blessed and really grateful to have my guest, Twyla. I'm going to try to get this right. Verhelst,
That's great.
here with us today. Hello, Twyla. Thank you
Hi,
for being here.
Rabina. Thank you for
Hi.
having me. So great to be
Oh,
here.
thank you. It is my pleasure. So, just to give a brief introduction to, I'm going to bring this in a little bit more. To all of you who Twyla is, I met Twyla actually through Misty Mejia and her amazing theater public speaking program. But beyond that, Twyla I don't want to act like you're not here, but you're the head of the accounting channel at FreshBooks. And you're also the creator and founder of Women in Accounting, which is kind of like this mentorship program and collaborative and collective where we can come together and support each other in accounting, which as a person who spent a good couple of decades in accounting, I so appreciate it and honestly wish that I had it in my life when I was going through the ranks. And beyond that, you're a wife, you're a mother, you're a daughter, and all the things that we bring to life, and also an avid runner and lover of mountains like I am. So thank you, Twyla, for being here.
Thanks, Rabina. And you just reminded me that I cannot wait for the day that you and I get to hit the trail together, whether it's for a walk, a hike, a run. I am so very much looking forward to that. We'll make it happen
Yeah.
soon.
Yes, same. Yeah, I've been getting my running shoes back out again. So
Nice.
I believe it will happen in 2022.
All right. We'll
All right.
manifest it. Let's do it.
So today we're going to be talking about, I'm going to share it with everybody here, is we're going to talk about fear and curiosity, which when I was asking you, what would you like to talk about? You said, oh, let's talk about curiosity, and not just curiosity, but fear. And I was like, yes, because I've transformed my life by getting curious about fear. So I'm just want to pause here a moment and have you share why it is that you wanted to talk about curiosity and fear.
Yeah, let's do that. I mean, there's so much that we can learn from fear and curiosity combined. And as adults, we're often in this mode. I don't know about you, Robina, but I know for me, I'm often in this mode of get things done. We've got things to do. You mentioned I'm a wife, I'm a mother. I have my hands in a few different places professionally. And we often miss the magic because we've got a schedule, we've got things to do, we've got agendas to keep and tasks to check off our to-do list. But if you think back to when we were a child, we were filled with so much wonder. We were born learners, and we felt so hungry for learning something new and being really curious.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about what we used to say as kids, we often said, why? But why? Or how come? Or what if? And that's one of my favorite questions. What if? Because at some point during our upbringing, if you stopped looking for that wonder. We started to just accept what is, or what I like to say, what's so. And many of us lost that curiosity and that sense of adventure because we accepted what was so. And we also were on a path to get things done. And our desire to push ourselves stopped subconsciously or consciously, I believe, out of fear. Because as we mature, we start to set our boundaries and we start to sit inside of what feels comfortable, what feels inside of our boundaries for risk. And as adults, we're actually really efficient with decision making. We now, when we're faced with things, at least myself, I know when I'm faced with things, if I don't pause to think about it, I instantly will say yes or no. Yes or no thanks. And often it's a no thanks because I've done this really fast, very efficient calculation in my head. Is this comfortable? Do I have time for this? Can I pause? What else do I have to do? And does it feel risky? And so instead of that efficient subconscious decision making, what if we got more curious? Because often we are we subconsciously say, I'm afraid, that's too risky, I might get hurt, or I don't have the skills to do that. And our brains do that really fast, so
Yeah.
fast as adults versus as kids. We didn't say that. We didn't knee jerk our response. Instead, we actually said yes and dug in further. Why? How come? What if? And so I believe that as adults, we often neglect to do this and that we short ourselves of experience and we don't participate in it as an experiment because we don't give ourselves that moment to say, why, what if, how come, and we don't explore the way that we used to explore as a child.
Yeah. Yeah. I can like hallelujah, amen. I totally agree. And there's so much in there about the risk and the assessment. And there's even you're probably familiar with the book Burnout. Well,
Mm-hmm.
actually, yeah, I shared it when we were talking. And
Mm-hmm.
there's the piece in there where we are like women will, and I think all humans, we go through this calculation like you're talking about, and we assess the risk. And we're more likely, like where we'll say no if that risk is deemed to be too high or the outcomes would not be at the level that we would want it to be. And I found that really curious, but I totally agree with you when about that toddler curiosity stage is I remember in my business when I started it, I still had no idea what it was that I was going to do. I just knew that there was something that I was being called to create and it was no longer in public accounting. And so I shifted out of that. And then it was like, but then there's that stage of, like your business goes through those stages. It's the infancy stage. Like you're almost helpless. What do I do? And I had plenty of business skills and that I could bring in with me. But then I got to this point where I called it, I'm going through my toddler phase. And this is where if anybody tells me no, I'm just going to ask again because toddlers don't care if you tell them no. They just keep going. And I just am going to keep doing it. Fall down, get up. Like it's all brand new and I have to figure it out. And it's just like when you're learning to walk as a baby, right? How many times do babies fall down? So that was the energy that I brought to it in that kind of first or secondish year, I would say. But beyond that, in what you're talking about is that curiosity is I started looking around and saying, okay, well, what does that look like to be a toddler? So you see these kids in the store and they've got their little princess gowns and superhero things and they're just singing. And I thought, you know what? If I walked into a store right now and I had a princess gown on and I started singing, people would probably be looking at me a little bit strange. They would distance themselves. Whereas when we're little, we're praised for it, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
praised for being different. We're praised for that creative curiosity. And at
Mm-hmm.
some point, like you said, and I, in the theme of what this is, we start adapting to that's not normal. You don't do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rabina, it's not normal to go wear your princess dress in public and sing.
Mm-hmm.
And so we start kind of curtailing that creativity, that curiosity, and we're quieting it versus just living, I think, from that place of who we are. So now it's about how do we rediscover what that is, and like you're saying, is getting curious. For me, I started getting curious about the fear. I'm curious for you what that looks like is like your process of either getting comfortable-ish with fear or curious about it.
Yeah, and to me, with fear, it's a matter of reframing it, and I think firstly, it's the conscious reframing. So you talked about your business and how you felt okay being in a toddler phase. Often as adults, we don't do that. We don't want to look silly. We don't want to fall down. We don't want to lose money. We don't want to be exposed. We don't want to get hurt. Like all of these things ladder on to our decision making that kids don't tend to care about. They don't think about they don't think about getting hurt. They don't think about looking silly. They'll wear their princess dress and sing because that's what they're inspired to do, versus we've
Mhm.
limited ourselves as adults to thinking inside that normal and almost then not thinking. And so instead, I think the spot to really see fear differently is to be conscious about it. So instead of thinking, I'm afraid, because we all have moments where I'm afraid, whether you realize it or not, your mind has gone through, I'm scared. And what if you instead said, I'm curious? Or if that's too risky, you instead said, that makes me wonder. Or I can't do that, because often we have this preconceived notion about where our skills start and stop, what we can and can't do. What if you say, I'm interested to see what happens? So that's for me where fear can start to break itself down a little bit and not be this big barrier or roadblock, is to reframe it. So by changing fear into curiosity, we can almost treat life or the opportunities we're presented with or the challenges that are placed in front of us as adults as experiments. So that's what I like to use as part of my reframing, is thinking of these instances or as life in general as an experiment. And that will allow us to, instead of subconsciously saying, nope, no, thank you, and you move on and almost forget that decision or that opportunity was even presented to you, that you stop for a moment, that you wonder, that you're conscious about that process that your mind is going through, about, is there an opportunity here to learn, to be curious? And instead of thinking about, I'll fail, instead think about, what could I learn? And so that times of challenge become opportunities to learn. So let me give a really, really real life example. This week is challenging for me. It's a week where I anticipated I was going to be able to do a lot of work that I hadn't got done in the past few weeks. Yesterday, my childcare provider called in sick. She's not able to come. We all know that if you got one symptom, please don't come to my home right now. And so she called in sick. Then layered on top of that, my daughter's stepmother. So my daughter's from a former marriage, and my daughter spends some time at her dad's house with her dad and stepmom. Got COVID yesterday. And so then on top of it, my dad needs to have an appointment, and I'm my dad's primary caregiver for both of my parents. I'm their primary caregiver now that they've aged. And so instantly my week turned from, I wanted to do heads down some really solid work and have some creative time and get some big projects over the finish line, to, I have life being thrown at me. And I'll be honest, I wanted to kick and scream like a toddler and have a tantrum is what I felt like doing yesterday. But instead, you could go through the week feeling really stressed. I'm not going to get done what I want to get done. This isn't fair. I'm so tired of COVID, like all of the things. Instead, it's like, all right, let's see how I can manage this curveball. Let's see how I can balance out a week that I love to plan. I had this beautiful week planned in my mind that now isn't going to transpire. Let's treat that as an experiment. Let's treat this as an opportunity to, what does fine-tuning that balance look like during a week that isn't the week that I expected? And so that's a small example of how often we're throwing these curveballs or things that become stressful or fearful, and you can turn it into opportunity to see what's there for me. And that's very conscious. And it doesn't happen automatically. It doesn't happen overnight. Believe me, I wanted to just be stressed for the rest of the week because that was the easier route, to just sit in some discomfort. But instead, I try to reframe it as an experiment. And this doesn't come naturally to me. I'm fortunate to have the gift of a daughter who is on the autism spectrum. And believe me when I'm saying I am the most impatient person that I've ever met, that I like to run at full speed, 110 miles an hour all the time. I just am that person who tends to be in overdrive. And as I'm getting older, that's starting to catch up with me. But nonetheless, she's taught me some lessons around pausing, being present, and being really curious. Because with my daughter, there was no manual that came. There's no manual that comes with any kid. And I started working with professionals with her when she was very young, under the age of 2. And they got me exploring her learning and development, things that I wouldn't have been conscious of had she have been on the typical growth trajectory with her learning and her absorption of different skills from just mimicking and imitating, those things didn't happen. So I got very curious with her, and she prompted me to pause, to slow down, and to get really interested in not just what so, but the what if or the how come. Because believe me when I tell you, it was one of the scariest days of my life when my daughter was diagnosed with autism. In fact, just thinking back on it, it chokes me up. I mean, that was over 12 years ago now. And it was so scary because that wasn't the parenting I imagined. I was scared. I was fearful. But I pivoted really quickly to, I'm her mom. I got to do what I got to do. And then second, that I'm going to get really curious about what's available to her and what I can do to support her in her growth. And I use that curiosity to now continue to parent, even in moments where it's challenging, moments when it's fun, moments when I feel very grateful. I'm always really curious. And so it's funny how life can kind of put these instances in front of you that start to prompt this and pull it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I'm going to just take a pause there for a minute because that's a lot. And I mean, first, thank you for sharing that. You know, a lot of people may come on here and just like, we're just kind of talking the talk, but not about what's happening behind the scenes. Right. And we've all been walking through that for, I don't want to just say a couple of years. We've been walking through it for a long time. It's just come more now. We have more conversations around it. So again, I mean, thank you for just having the courage to share that with all of us. And I'm sure that there's somebody out here out there that's going to hear this and be like, okay, it's not just me, and need that reminder. And what you said it's so powerful. It's so true. I know it because I've felt it in myself. Is like, this is an opportunity. And I will say, like, I'm a big fan of Gary Zukav. If you don't know who he is, he wrote Seed of the Soul. And he has, like, him and his wife, Linda, have programs. And for the past 5 years, I've been walking through the stuff that he shares. And it really is about life is an experiment, right? To get curious about that fear. And I didn't realize how many frightened parts of my own personality that I had that were controlling me and where I was making my decisions from. And so for me, it's getting not just curious about, well, what is that, is more like also how am I feeling? Because once I started tuning into my body, then my body was letting me know that it was fear. And then I started getting more curious about, well, what kind of fear is it? Because fear is like saying you're going to Europe. Like if someone says, where are you going? Oh, Europe. Where? Like they want to know, right? And so I'm always like, what is this fear? Is it like you were talking about, that fear of failure, of like judgment? And so I have this list of them that I will run through. And again, yeah, they develop over time, you know, the people around us, and where I can see in my life where those things that you're talking about, where I was juggling my husband being deployed and having 2 babies and working this job, yet the only thing I ever wanted people to see was just CPA Robina and not mom, and my house is kind of half in chaos and my kids this, and not fully being there because I wasn't acknowledging the fear that I had around all of that. So what you were saying, Twyla, about how do we reframe it, it reminds me of where people say fear and excitement feel the same to your body. And so I will just tell myself, oh, I'm excited about this, to kind of shift my perspective through that. And like you were sharing, you know, about your family and all of that, and everything that you have going on. And it really truly is an experiment, right? Like we're just experimenting in each day with, what if I just make one adjustment? Like no 2 days are ever the same, by the way. Like you could try, but they're never going to be the same. So here you are in the face of all of this. I mean, let's just be real about where you are. You're navigating, you know, like if you know Kim Barnes and her husband, they have parenting aging parents, right? So you have your parents that you're navigating, you're caring for them. You have your daughter, you have your team at FreshBooks that you're navigating, and then your own well-being. And so here you are sharing your curiosity for your daughter, right? Like I got to get curious about this, which we do when our loved ones, there's something we want. But what about like that curiosity for yourself and your own self-care? Because someone who's going 110 miles an hour all the time, you like that self-care is so important. And has that changed over time, how you've integrated that into your life, your work?
Yeah, great question. And actually, maybe before I answer that, I want to just mention one thing, because you talked about how you will, in your own mind, say fear and excitement do feel the same or very similar to your body. And instead of saying I'm scared, that you'll say I'm excited. I actually have taken a slightly different approach, only because with my daughter, you have to label things as they are. It's funny in the English language how many times we have these words that mean multiple things, or they're spelled slightly different, but they sound the same, and it's really confusing. So with my daughter, I've actually started to use the phrase, I was scared, but I did it anyway. And for her, it's a magical parenting moment when you can use that, like teach her how to say something in context, and then she uses it in another context that also fits. And so within our household, it's the I was scared, but I did it anyway. And I taught that to my daughter. I use that with my team. I use that with my mom. So being what's called a sandwich caregiver, which is you're caring for your aging parents, but you're also still caring for a child. And so I'm a sandwich caregiver. My mom, I'm seeing what 80 years old and a lifetime of fear looks like now at 80. And when I moved my parents from about 12, if I'm talking miles, about let's see, it was about 10-hour drive. So I moved them through COVID because my mom, her mental health actually slipped during COVID. And I moved them out here to be with us and live with us for 90 days until we found them a place that was comfortable in the right setting. And with her, she became extremely fearful. And I used that phrase with her. And then I'll be honest, I use it on myself, where I feel that discomfort, instead of reshaping it to excitement, which I think is so powerful. Words matter, and what we tell ourselves is so true, and what we say to ourselves becomes our identity. I just read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, and he talks about how habits can be part of your identity, and you can almost convince yourself you're a morning person, you're a night person, you're a fearful person, you're an excited person through what you tell yourself. And so I will use the words, I'm scared, but I'm going to do it anyway. And then I add on, for my own purposes, I'm going to see what's here for me, and I'm going to explore this. And when you talked about my own life and how I do it, I mean, I'm far from perfect. In fact, just a few weeks ago, I was listening to a Brene Brown podcast that made me feel so much better when she said that she writes what she needs, meaning that what she puts into her books, she doesn't have perfect yet. She writes it because she needs it. So I say, I was scared, but I did it anyway, to my daughter, to my mother, to my team, when often I need it myself, and I need that reminder myself. And I'm very good at using other opportunities in my life to try something on and see if I can put it into practice in another setting. So an example of this, really easy, straightforward example, I already told you, I'm very impatient, and I like to go at a fast speed, sometimes at a uncomfortable speed for those who are on that road with me. I use yoga as the time to focus, to slow down, to be patient. I can't speed through the class. If I'm in a class at my local studio, I can't be like, well, I'm kind of done now, I'm just going to leave. I have to stay there. I have to be focused. Otherwise, I'm going to either fall over or get behind, or not even look like I'm participating in the class, where it's like, she's just doing her own thing. If I force myself to be present, to stay present, to focus, And then I take that and use that in my life in other areas. And so that's my little experiment where it's like, okay, I'm going to try this on here in a setting where I'm basically forced to do these things and see if I can apply it in a different setting where I'm not forced to. So a great example of this would be if I'm trying to write something, if I'm trying to write an email, because I'm very good at, I like to say multitasking, but I actually lose focus. And I will then say, okay, if I can focus in 60 minutes inside of a class, I can focus long enough and not be distracted by my phone, the Slack messages, etc., to write a really great email that I'm feeling is a good communication to the person on the other end receiving it. And so that's a very small example, but if you kind of take that and make it bigger, the same applies. So whether it's doing something that is uncomfortable, but you kind of tried it on in another setting, that's a little experiment. Whether it's doing something that actually makes you a bit afraid or feels risky or feels like something that normally you wouldn't try, have you tried it in another setting? Or could you make another setting available to you? And so this is where some folks who might be watching this have recognized me from being the founder of the video per day experiment, which was never meant to be an experiment for everyone, but believe me, I love that it happened that way. That was a case of I was on a call, a panel presentation on International Women's Day. I got off that call, put my laptop down and said, that sucked, because I wasn't pleased with how I showed up. And so that in that moment, I created the video per day experiment, not a challenge, experiment to see what would happen. So I create experiments for myself when there isn't one available to then crack back that fear, start to do something that I'm not comfortable with, build a skill, do something that's really courageous to me. It felt really vulnerable to do that experiment and to try something on that I could then apply in other areas of my life.
Yeah. Well, and you said so much in there that I was like, yes, yes, yes. I would be taking notes, but I want to be paying attention. I wholeheartedly agree. The experiment piece of it, that's kind of what it is. And I asked myself, what is it that I'm believing in this moment? Right? Like, this isn't happening to me, it's happening for me. So what am I believing in this moment? And what else might be true? Right? Like, what if this isn't true? Just it's playing that game with yourself, so to speak, to get out of that mindset of what I'm believing in this moment. This is the only way. And like you said, getting curious. And part of it, I will say, like, where am I feeling this? What is this really? Other times I'm like, you know what? I want to move through this. So I'm not going to have a conversation with myself about what this fear is, whether it's rejection or, let's say abandonment or failure, inferiority, superiority, all of those things. It's just, let's push through that. Let's get curious. What if something else true if this is coming from fear? Because like you said, there's those snap decisions. Is it coming, is this really what I want, or is it coming from fear? And being intentional in those decisions and what we're creating. And I agree with you that being really honest about it of, I'm scared, but I did it anyway, right? Like facing that fear. And the other one that I went to when I was starting my business is I had heard Jewel speak, and she was saying, she has this phrase when she goes into meeting, because here's this gal, like she was on her own, really young, and trying to figure out this whole business world of music. And she's saying, like, I'm capable of learning what I need to know. And so I would go in these situations and just say, okay, I'm capable of learning what I need to know. Like versus feeling like I had to have all of the answers. And I think for you, like, or I can relate when you say, like, you get done with something and you're like, oh, that sucked. I was terrible. I think because for me, I could see there's that part of me that felt like I always had to have all of the answers. And so I wasn't showing up as my fullest self, right? Like you're saying, is presencing myself or feeling even connected to the people that I'm with. I was so in my head about everything else that I wasn't really in that moment. And I was one of those people, by the way, when I was really in it before I started on this path of kind of finding out more about myself, I went to yoga, and I remember I said, that was a waste of my time. I am never going to get that hour back. That was like torture to me to have to sit through yoga. Which now when I go, I'm like, oh yes, this is wonderful. I love it. The other thing that you mentioned is about Brene, right? She writes for herself. And I think that we all do that. Like, I write for myself. If I show up in a group, like in my soul circles, for example, I was walking through the stuff with my mom selling the home that we had lived in for 40 years. And I could either choose to show up and like put on this fake face, or I could share what I had learned from that whole experience and what it was bringing up in me. And that's where I found the more authentic conversations happened in my groups. And I have to imagine the fact that you're bringing this to what you're doing with your team at Facebook and in the Women in Accounting mentoring circle, it's transforming the relationships that are happening there as well, because it's enabling other people that I don't want to say work with, that you're in community with, to be able to, like, it's almost that permission. Like, you get permission to show up and bring more of yourself to the table versus just this professional side of you. So maybe in that, because one of the topics we were talking about is leadership, is how are you seeing that different now and bringing that to what you're doing versus in the past? Maybe share a little on that with me, at least. And then
yeah, I'd love to. And leadership is hard. And I've said this to somebody on my team recently who she's just turning into a leader, and we're really trying to work with her and support her in this transition from being one of the team members to a leader. And outside of parenting, I believe that leadership is the hardest thing you will do. Parenting, hands down. Those kids are confusing, but leadership is hard, and it's this fine line of being a role model, being professional, in that you've got a job as a leader to move everyone forward. I mean, that's part of the weight on the shoulders of a leader, is to keep everyone going in the same direction, all for the same goals, all at the same time. It's a lot because you're dealing with humans. Everyone's got a different day every day, different experiences, different skill sets, etc. So it's hard, but it also, the thing that I learned the most about really coming into my own as a professional is to stop being so darn professional. And it's a fine line. We can't go all in, but I think especially, both you and I, Robina, we took our CPAs, we got designated. And I feel like part of like getting that designation and putting on that cap and saying, I did this, was like, don't you dare be vulnerable. You are being hired as a professional. You're being hired for your expertise. You are being valued for your expertise. Don't you dare be vulnerable, showcase a weakness, showcase you don't know. And it's this really interesting kind of spot that we're in as a profession, where it's like, yes, you are being hired for your skill set and your expertise and your experience that you bring to the table. But are you actually giving as much value by never showing your true self, never being and showing up as the human that you actually are? And I remember in my practice, we had an advisory practice. We did advisory truly before advisory was even a word. And I remember one day I had an in-person, this is back when we did in-person meetings. I had an in-person meeting with one of my clients. And I remember we spent the first 15 minutes of our time together kind of complaining about the school system here locally. And I actually felt really like I got out of the call or out of the meeting where we did talk about our business and what the finances and the numbers meant. But I remember leaving going like, ugh, I feel a little bit uncomfortable that I got that like into a conversation that was so far away from what she hired me to do. And it actually deepened our relationship, because now we shared this experience of her being frustrated by the school that her son's in, me being frustrated by, you know, having to change schools for my daughter. And like we were both in the same spot together. And it created this deeper relationship where I then was able to better support her in her business, which in the moment it felt like kind of icky that I'd been complaining to somebody and that's not the professional that she had hired, but it actually changed our relationship.
Yeah.
So that was an example of looking back on that, where it first felt icky and then I kind of let it have some time and some space. And then I realized, wow, our relationship has really deepened. And, you know, if I'm really honest, I increased her prices in that next year because she valued my services and my relationship with her as a result of us having that different connection. So the same holds true for leadership, where if there's moments where your team can learn from you from example or experiences that you've had or shared moments together, I do believe that it creates a different leadership opportunity where you can share that together, deepen that relationship. Instead of just being the yes boss type leader, you can be what I like to call a heart-led leader, where there's times when you have to be a bit more stern or a bit more, nope, we're moving this forward. In fact, I had a team member ask me yesterday, can we change a deadline? And my answer was nope, because that's not real life, that you get to change a deadline, that you show up for the deadline and the deadline was set. So there's times when you have to be a little bit more stern and other times when it's like, you know what, I'm not changing that deadline, but I will give you some of my time this week. What can I do to support you with getting to that deadline successfully? So that's the balance of being able to kind of pull in I'm the leader here and I need to keep us moving forward, but I also want to show up as a human and be leading by example and have deep relationships with clients or with team members. And it's tricky. Going back to what I said, it's like the second hardest thing that I've done. Harder even than supporting my parents who are aging. It's hard and but it's so rewarding.
I honestly, Twyla, I think we could probably spend a whole hour just on that one little segment that you did there. And I think that's when I think about like, oh, how we could like transform we'll just say accounting industry because that's what I know. But I talk to other people. It's in other business segments as well. But that relationship piece is so important. And I was always just naturally friendly with people. So I enjoyed that more. But there was this pressure like, oh, but I have to be CPA Robina. We got to come talk business, right? But I'm wanting to chat with people about what they did on their weekends. And I think that helps. And I remember this point before I left public accounting. I was working with my coach and she was saying something to me. We were kind of walking through this exercise and it was all around trust. And I was like, man, I would go to bat for my team. And she's like, yeah, but do you trust them? And so there was this piece of it where it was like, oh, I want them to trust me, but I'm not trusting them by showing them who I really am. And so how do you have trust at all? And I think that was a hugely pivotal moment for me and how I approached my team and how I started showing up with them, because I could show up with her and be honest about what I was feeling, but did my team really see me from that perspective? And again, going back to, I haven't read Atomic Habits yet. It's kind of on my very big list of books, but even that building that habit in, right? All of these boundaries and what we've adjusted to, even that the decrease in curiosity, that is a habit that was built over time. Be based upon a belief that we either inherited or developed or whatever, right? Our habits, our behaviors mimic that belief. And something that you said in there as well. So again, just kind of to recap, like, yes, that trust component and letting other people see me, it transformed my relationships in my firm. Like, who I maybe was resistant to before, once I opened myself up, it opened the door to that relationship. Because it was, I think in the past, I just approached it as this is my job and that these aren't all relationships, right? Like shifting that mindset. Something that you said in there, though, that I wanted to grab, which was really powerful. Oh, more like in that piece also, when you're talking about with your employees, we're just going to use that, or with your client was a great example, is you both were walking into a meeting, right? Who knows what was happening up into that point? And it could be really easy. Like you could be attached to the outcome, which again is just, could coming from fear. Like, I got to run this meeting a certain way. We have to discuss these things. Yet you're also bringing in the fact that you're navigating a school system, which I've been through that as well with my son, like the frustrations of not getting the help that he needed and having to make changes. So giving that space then says, oh, I see you. You're there. I'm going to acknowledge you. And now I'm not, like, my way to interact with you isn't so clouded and murky, right? We carry that weight. The same for your employees. The other thing that's in there, and I don't want to go off on a tangent, which I could be, because there's like all this stuff is in there. But even in those relationships, right? You have, who knows what's going on at home with them. But you are also the person that they feel controls their money, right? And money, we know, is a really powerful, it can be for some people a really powerful emotional opportunity to find something else about themselves. So even that dynamic, and bringing it hopefully full circle, is when we start to create that relationship with our clients, it's not then about what money do you want from me? It's then how do we create together? And then when we do that with our employees, it's not that they're not being who they are because they fear you taking away their money. It's like, oh, I have a relationship with this person, and they get more comfortable in that situation. So I just share that because there's so many dynamics that are always happening in those leadership roles, like you said, that makes it such a, I don't want to say challenging, an experiment in how you can come at that each and every day, and like what choice you're going to make in those moments, right?
Yeah,
Hopefully
for sure.
that makes sense. It was just,
no, I give you a lot. I appreciate that you pulled that apart. And I think the biggest thing that I'm trying to instill in my team, while I keep us all going forward in the same direction, is that they pause and get curious, and that they know that there's going to be times when they might say that sucked, but that they take that as the opportunity to say, all right, what's here for me? Because often as adults, when we have that sucked moment, whether that was when I talked about, the start of the video per day experiment, or the client relationship where we walked into the meeting and I was like, oh, I can't believe I just complained about my daughter's school. Meanwhile, the client complained about it too, but in the moment, all I could think about is the things that I said that didn't feel very professional in that moment. And instead of saying, well, that sucked, and that I'm never doing that again, right? That's as adults, that's what we tend to do when we have that sucked. I'm going to learn from that. I'm never doing that again. It's like, but what if you explored what's there so that it did look different next time, but that you turn it into an experiment? And so for me, with the video per day experiment, it was then that sucked. I could have in that moment said, I'm not a public speaker. I'm never again going to get on camera. I'm never saying yes to participate to any of these panels. I'm done. Meanwhile, you said at the beginning of this call, how you and I met was that I'm continuing to try to grow my ability to communicate. And so that was that moment. I could have said, I'm not doing that again, or I'm going to try something else. In the moment with my client, I could have said, I'm never talking anything personal again, ever in a meeting. And instead I was like, no, I'm just going to give this some space to just let what happened happen. It would feel really silly if I turned around and went back to the client right now and said, I'm so sorry for complaining. Because meanwhile, she actually did too. So I didn't want to make her feel uncomfortable. It was no, let's just pause. Let's see what's there. Because I was actually fearful in that moment. I was like, did I just mess up a client relationship? But it actually turned into a better client relationship. And so what I did from that is I got more curious to say, if I show up a little bit less polished, a little bit more human, a little bit more vulnerable in certain circumstances, does it create a better experience for the person on the other side of this conversation, of this relationship? Does it deepen those client relationships or my leadership capabilities if I take some of that edge off? So that's just part of the curiosity that goes from fear to curiosity, which is very, very conscious in every moment. So that's where with my team, I just encourage them to pause, get curious, and just explore. And even if all they do as a starting point is say, what's here? What happened? You talked earlier about kind of the reality. I like to call it the what so, because we can often create stories in our heads around what so, versus peeling that away and just saying, here's what's actually true. What's actually true is I showed up on a video call and didn't present the way I wanted to. I don't suck. I just showed up on a video call and didn't present the way I wanted to. What's so in the client meeting? I showed up in that client meeting and said something I feel like I'm unsure if I should have said, but that's it. Like, does she think I'm an idiot? Does she think that I complain too much? That's all stories in my head. What's so is that I said something in a client meeting that I'm unsure if that's what I should have said. Or I was on a video call, it didn't show up the way I would have liked to. That's what's so. These other things are stories. And so that's where I try to encourage my team to just peel back the layers of what so, then get curious about what you could do now, what you can learn, what you can create for yourself to get really exploratory, to try something on that feels uncomfortable or fearful, and to change that relationship with fear, that relationship with discomfort, and just see what's there. I like to just frame it as just see what's there, just see what could happen.
Well, and in that, I don't know about you, but for me, by asking, well, what if, right? Like, what if I like look at this differently and I don't, let that control me, was also in that I started to develop a relationship, not with just understanding fear, but also a relationship with my intuition and my truth. Because that was something that I got like, I'm just going to ignore that, right? It would tell me, go this direction, Robina. And I would say, no. And so for me, it helped me to, it was kind of like those nudges. It's like, I'm just going to try this. For example, normal, when I started this, it was spaghetti on the wall. I don't know. I just feel like I need to do this. I don't know what it's going to look like. I'm just going to do it. So every time I introduce it, it's something different. And it's no different than when I meet somebody. It's kind of like, what was it? Kramer, right? Every time in Seinfeld, he entered completely different every single, just sliding into the room, right? So it's like every time I'm sliding into a situation differently. And, I was sharing about Gary is like, from that, I learned to like, maybe what I thought was not a perfect delivery was actually perfect, because I got exactly what I needed from that moment. And then I'm going to trust that that other person got what they needed, because they're not thinking about me. They're probably thinking about them and what they did. Right. And so if it makes me stop and ask something, okay, well, what would I do differently? Right. Then it was perfect for me and what I needed. And going back really quick, and then I do want to touch on your mentoring program, because this all comes together, is I actually have a mentor even right now, because as much of like that you and I are talking about this, like you said, we're not perfect. We're walking through it all of the time. And she reminds me of that. And she's been helping me, that voice of false belief that I call it. That's like, Robina, what was one of them? You started the little voice in my head. You started this business so you could spend more time with your kids, right? So it was like very critical, as if I don't spend time with my kids. And so she would say, well, just reframe it, right? Like, what is your response? Well, actually, instead of feeling defensive, it's like, well, actually, I do spend more time with my kids than I did when I was in public accounting, right? Because that voice was always going to believe that it's that always, never, right? You always this, you never that. And so breathing some room in there for something different, like you're talking about. And then that's the space that we can make a choice the next time, right? It's all an experiment. We wouldn't even be here, by the way, if I didn't experiment. It was a long time ago someone had died in an accident, and I heard about it. And so I started looking into his work and stuff, and he had a 7-day blog challenge. And so I'm like, okay, well, I could do a blog, like 7 days, no problem. And so I set up a site, this little website. I didn't tell anybody about it. And so for 7 days I blogged, and that's what kind of opened this door into more. And, every once in a while I'll go post on something there, because I'm like, oh, well, no one will find it here. But it opened this door into so much more. And you never know what you're going to discover when you just get a little bit of curiosity going, right?
Yeah. Well, and think about if you don't, right? I like saying this often, like, when I am faced with fear or something that feels uncomfortable, where it's like, no. Like my instinct is saying, like, don't do that. Like your gut reaction or your subconscious before you're even aware of it, that you said no and you moved on to the next thing. But instead, if you ask, what if I don't? What if I don't do this? And so I think that opens up that space to just be really curious. So for example, with creating a blog, that you're like, well, nobody's going to see it. I'll just get really, exploratory with it and get uncomfortable and whatever. Nobody will find it anyways. Yeah. So at least as a starting point of probably your writing, you're getting creative, all of the things that then followed after that. And so I like to kind of spin that on its head. Like, what if I do that and I fail? It's like, but what if you don't do that and you miss the magic? You miss the growth. You miss the door that opens. You miss the opportunity to meet somebody new. You just don't know, right? And so, circling this back to burnout, I don't want to discredit that burnout is really real, and that there are times that you have to set your boundaries and say yes or no. But my encouragement is to do that really consciously, as opposed to being very reactive about yes, no, here's where my comfort lies. I won't do that. I will do this. Because even subconsciously, we can get ourselves to a spot of burnout or over committing to things that then lead us to a spot of like, I can't do all this. I feel overwhelmed, etc. So be conscious. And at least then you are not only then really being clear on your boundaries, but also giving that space to be like, is there something here that could get me learning something new or meeting somebody new or trying something on? Because believe me, watching my mom, who's 80, go through this very fast pivoting of mental health that turned on us really unexpectedly, from her being incredibly independent, being a professional and running their own business when I was growing up, to them having their own home and etc., to now where I take care of their day to day. They have their meals prepped for them. Like very quickly that happened, and she's extremely fearful. That I can't help but think, if there had been a little more discomfort throughout her life, if she had faced fear a little bit more often, could things look different? And we'll never know that. So I'm trying to just teach her that now and support her with facing that fear, that I was scared, but I did it anyway. I use that with her when it comes to meeting somebody new at their seniors facility, where she used to be so social and now she's afraid to say something for fear that she says the wrong thing. And really just trying to keep yourself touching on that discomfort so that we don't get so comfortable subconsciously that come later in our lives that now we've not flexed that muscle and not used that skill set and not been as exploratory as we could have been, that would have paid off later in our lives.
Yeah. Oh, God. Yeah. I feel like we could do an all-day seminar on this, Twyla, because it is true. Like, I look at it myself. I'm like, what if I hadn't let fear control so many of my decisions for so long in my life? Like, I truly trust that it happened at the time that it was supposed to, or else it wouldn't have. But I can't say that I don't have those moments of regret where I'm like, oh, if I had just learned this earlier in my life, how different would it have been? How much time would I wasted? And I think even more so, and even where your mom's walking, right? You're walking through new stuff every day with your child, right? Your daughter. You're walking through new stuff every day with your parents. They're walking through new stuff. We're always provided these opportunities where there is no roadmap. And so that invitation to look at what it is that we're scared of and do it anyway, right? Is really truly so powerful. And it makes me think of, so the other day I'm like, I'm going to do this Peloton app. I don't have a Peloton, but I'm going to use the app. And I posted on it. I'm like, I'm going to do instead of a challenge, it was an opportunity. It's like kind of what you were saying is like, what am I going to do with it in each day? And in the one where I did it, it was outside running. And she's like, you're too good to stop. You're just too good to stop. And so it's like bringing that to it is like, okay, I'm not going to let this fear stop me. I'm too good for that. So what if I just get curious, go like run a little bit harder or run just a little bit longer? What would that look like? And then even like what we're navigating, right? With our spouses, with our children, with our team members is what would it look like if we just got a little bit curious beyond that fear? And, hopefully your mom starts to like open up to that as well. I find that sometimes when we do it, then it gives people around us the permission to do it. So really quick, before we go, I don't want it to be too quick, but I'm going to put up here because I do want to circle back to this, because if there are women out there who are listening, and which, by the way, this impacts men too, sometimes more so. Like it's okay, like it's more accepted if a woman cries in the workplace than men. But burnout comes from, it's almost like it's like you detach from that empathy, that compassion part of you, right? Like, so we can all experience it. It isn't just women. For you and I, we're in that realm. So briefly, if you want to, I want to give an opportunity, and I'm going to put it up here, is to share. You created this mentoring community for women in accounting. And again, I think it's so powerful to have that. So just to share and how this, either helps what we've been talking about, the women out there, whatever you want to share on that. I don't want to take up any more time on it.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And thanks for letting me have the space to just share a bit about this. This really was an organic, came from what I was hearing in the profession. So the pandemic hit in 2020. I spent 2020, to be honest, feeling like I was sitting on my hands a bit, to be like, I don't know what to do. The profession is going through such a difficult time between government subsidies, supporting small businesses to stay afloat, their own like starting to work remote. They got kids at home and they're trying to keep like all of these things. And I felt really helpless through 2020. And what I did then at the turn of the calendar, gosh, the turn of the calendar can be so refreshing, but the turn of the calendar, 2020 over to 2021, I said, okay, there's got to be something I can do. And so I started to just listen more. And what I was hearing was burnout was becoming very real, feeling alone, feeling more isolated because now everyone was working remotely. We didn't even socialize. Like we lost a lot of the things that were bringing us to a spot of being connected. And then I also heard people feeling like somebody else is doing it better than I am, or I could never do that. And when we talk about facing fear and being curious, one of the best ways to do that is in relationship with somebody else. And I just realized that there's so many women who have got experience that as I start to reach out to women and said, I think I'm going to start doing some more mentoring. They said, I want to do some mentoring too, but I just don't know how to find the right woman that could use my experience and that I could be in a mentorship relationship with. And so I was like, gosh, we need a space where we can come together, get rid of that weird feeling of like, could you be my mentor? I don't know if you have time. Like just shed that away and let it be a space where we're there to be a mentor, be mentored, or both, or gosh, just find an accountability partner to shed some of that fear, to be more curious, to get, somebody else who's going to listen to you and say, hey, remember when you said, right? Like that, hold you accountable, remind you of why you started or what impact you can make. There's nobody better to do that than somebody that you're in a closer relationship with, that you trust, that is really there because they've got your back and they want to genuinely support you and help you be successful. So that's where the space was created, was an opportunity for women in the accounting profession, whether they want to be mentored, be a mentor, or both, to come together in this safe space to find one another, to connect with one another, to realize that you're not doing it wrong, that you're actually doing it exactly how you should be, and that there'll be somebody there to lock arms with and support you on the journey.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And I agree. And I saw Marriott made some comments, and Marriott is my accountability partner, and it has made all the difference in the world. So, I just thank you for creating this community. I've actually mentored through there, and it really is, it goes both ways. It doesn't matter the age, you mentor each other. There's something that we get in both directions, and that's what's beautiful. So I thank you for creating that community, Twyla, and I thank you for being here. I feel like we could go on, but we're a little couple minutes over, so I want to just let you go and create what it is that you're creating for the day and all that you're doing. But thank you. To anyone who's listening, I did put the link on the website. If you're just listening and not watching, it's womeninaccounting.online. And you can find Twyla on social. I mean, if you're listening, you're probably in LinkedIn, so you're able to find her there. If you want to learn more about what she's doing, if you want to learn more about women in accounting, reach out to either one of us. And or even if you want to, like, if you're someone who's out there and like, I want to work on Twyla's team, she sounds amazing. I'm sure that there's probably some great spots open at FreshBooks.
Yeah, there is.
Like into as well. So thank you so very much, Twyla. Like, this is such this is so near and dear to my heart. So I'm glad that we had this time together to talk about this. To everyone who is either watching this now or you're watching it in the future, I hope that this encourages you to use your courage, to be vulnerable. It is a strength, it is not weakness, and to get curious about the fear that may be showing up in your life and stopping you from doing something. Because beyond that, when you take one step beyond that fear and into curiosity, I believe that is where you will rediscover your own normal. So thank you to everybody. Thank you, Twyla. Until we meet again.
Bye.
Bye.